also like to introduce on this broadcast Steve Herman. He's the Chief National Correspondent of Voice of America. Steve, good evening. Nice to have you with us this morning here in India. This is a huge moment, a decisive moment in the fight against terror for America and really for the world. A lot of questions really about how this was done. Any operational details that we really have, Steve, because considering America didn't have boots on the ground, they still managed to, target, find out al-Zawahiri's location and pull off that drone strike.
Right. Well, America may not have boots on the ground, but it still definitely has agents, probably nationals of Afghanistan that are on the ground working with the U.S. intelligence agency, as well as eyes in the sky. And what we know, according to senior administration officials here, who did brief reporters just before President Biden spoke, is that they had detected the movement of Zawahiri's family back to Kabul. And that's what led them to keep an eye on this particular building. And then they started to notice this man standing on the balcony a lot, very similar to what we saw with Osama bin Laden in Abbottabad, where he essentially exposed himself to American surveillance.
Steve, as far as this particular killing is concerned, what it also raises questions over is the fact that Taliban clearly was shielding, was providing some logistical support, some protection for the al-Qaeda chief, and that by itself is extremely concerning.
Yes, according to American officials, the Taliban leadership had to know that this man, who was the most wanted terrorist by the United States, was not only inside the borders of Afghanistan, but in one of the poshest neighborhoods of Kabul, and may have had some interactions with Taliban leadership. So that is certain that the Taliban are going to be requested to answer for that. And it'll also be interesting to see how the U.S. responds to the Taliban statements that this was a violation of the Doha agreement, but the United States contends that in that agreement it did have the authorization to go after these types of terrorists who were threats to the United States and had killed many Americans over the years.
It's also a message to the Taliban, isn't it, Steve, that if there is any sort of terror threat that emerges out of Afghanistan, the United States still very much has the powers, has the strength to go ahead and target such terror threats.
Well, President Biden made that very clear in his 7 minutes of remarks this evening here. There is no doubt, although he focused more on what Zawahiri had done, and that this was a victory over terrorism rather than spending much time criticizing the Taliban.
Do you find that surprising, though? Do you think there would be a follow-up statement talking about Taliban as well, considering that the world right now is questioning that, about how the al-Qaeda chief was getting shielded, was getting protection right there in the heart of Kabul?
Well, that is certain to be something that administration officials, including at the White House, the State Department, the Defense Department, are going to be asked by reporters in the coming days, and we'll see what sort of statements also come out from the White House, the State Department, and the Defense Department. And then, of course, we have these frequent background conversations. But it's very obvious that top American officials are extremely displeased with the Taliban, who were apparently shielding this terrorist for an unknown period of time.
Very true. And Steve, let's talk also about Ayman al-Zawahiri, wanted across the world, of course, al-Qaeda chief. He had a hand in many, many terror attacks in the United States, too.
Yes, well, of course, going back to 9/11, he was always considered to be the close confidant of Osama bin Laden, his right-hand man, and then his eventual successor after bin Laden was killed by the United States in Pakistan. So for 21 years, he was either terrorist target number 2 or terrorist target number 1 by the United States. And obviously, as we saw with bin Laden, he appeared to get complacent over the years, although for a long, long time, both he and his family were very good, according to intelligence officials, at evading the intelligence dragnet.
From Osama bin Laden, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, now to Ayman al-Zawahiri. These are all extremely decisive moments in the fight against terror. And I think one administration after another, Steve, has reiterated that commitment to take on these terror leaders who pose a threat not just to America but to the world.
Yes, I don't think, though, that the intelligence community is resting too easy. They realize that we've gone from an era where it was basically al-qaeda out there to a hydra of different threats. Now this is a monster with many heads, but we do have an extremely robust counterintelligence operation in this country that did not exist in 2001, that was specifically set up to make sure that type of attack never happened again in the United States. And that sort of apparatus that has been set up by the intelligence community in the Defense Department is not going to go away just because another leader of al-Qaeda has been killed in this manner.
Steve, just to revisit my first question about the details that we have about the operation itself. We know that this was a drone strike and that it happened over the weekend, yes?
Yes, this was a drone that was firing what are called Hellfire missiles, according to sources. And what these Hellfires are capable of doing, they're sort of like giant blades or scissors, have you, where they use kinetic energy. It's not a big explosion, and that's how they were able to take him out while he was standing on the balcony without killing anybody else.
It's called a flying Jinsu, if I'm not wrong?
Well, I guess that's one term for it, but you can imagine instead of a big bomb, a big blade coming at you.
Okay, so that's the nature of strike. It's a precision strike that was conducted, and there was no harm done to any other civilians. There's also a confirmation that's coming from America on this particular incident. Yes, Steve?
That is correct, and we have not heard from the Taliban or any other authority in Afghanistan that there was any sort of collateral human casualties from this strike.
The Taliban has come out, as expected, to condemn what's happened, saying that, this was a violation of the Doha Agreement, etc., that international agreements have been breached with this drone strike. What do you think this really means as far as ties with the United States are concerned? Obviously, there have been none, but do you think that this will escalate tensions?
That remains to be seen. What we have to keep in mind is what leverage does the Taliban really have now, since the United States took its troops out of Afghanistan? That was their big request, right? Well, the United States now is holding billions of dollars that the Taliban government would like to have returned to Afghanistan. So it is the United States now that appears really to have the leverage in this relationship.
Very true. We'll see how this also moves going forward. Steve, thanks very much for joining us here on India Today and giving us all of those details of what we know really about this drone strike and the messaging that it sends out to all of these terror leaders across the world. The United States ensuring here that the al-Qaeda chief has been killed in an extremely successful operation, a drone strike that happened over the weekend we hear in Kabul.